Hello and welcome to the NAESP Principal Podcast. We are super excited that you're here listening with us today. I'm Equetta Jones, principal of Love Creek Elementary, and I will be today's host. Today we'll be discussing school safety. We have with us Dr. Jessica Grant, who is a product of Prince George County's public schools. She is a dedicated leader of a K-5 school. In December 2017, she became a nationally board certified teacher focusing on early childhood and middle childhood reading language arts. Dr. Grant's experience includes mentoring novice teachers and developing plans to impact school improvement. We also have the honor of having Ashley Farrington with us. Ashley Farrington's journey in education, he has served in various leadership capacities at both the elementary and middle school level. He is currently the principal of Birchview Elementary School. Farrington is currently serving as the president-elect of Minnesota Elementary Principals Association and strives to work with others to create a safe, inclusive, and positive learning environment for all students. Let's get started. So excited that you are both here today. We're going to go with our first question. We're going to kick it to Dr. Grant. Would you please share with us how school leaders build relationships with law enforcement and first responders to collaborate on school safety planning?
So thank you for having me here. I'm so excited for this opportunity to have this discussion with you both. And as the new principal of my school last year, it was so important that I had an opportunity to get to know those that serve that school, meaning the police officers, the facility that was assigned to that school. And so I reached out to the officers. I was able to get to know the corporals who work directly with my school, and invite them in the building, walk them through the building so they can actually see the floor plan of the building. Making sure that they understand who I am as the new leader of that school, and also invite them to activities that we have. So it was so important just to start building that relationship and a rapport with them. So that way we can build an authentic relationship, and then they will be able to support the school should there be a concern or be a part of events that we have. So it was great for me to get to know who they are, and for me to have their telephone numbers. So that way, if there was a concern at the building, I would be able to contact them directly. And this is also for not just the police station that was assigned to my school, but also for the school resource officers that are located at high schools within my district. So getting to know that individual as well and having their contact information so that way we can connect if needed or when needed.
There were so many good responses in there. And one thing I would like to add, because similarly, things that you mentioned, there are things that I've done in my school too. I've been super proud of the connection that we have with, in our district, the Plymouth Police Department and the Plymouth Fire Department. I think they have done a good job of reaching out to us, right, in the fall. Like when we think about safety and things like that, and one of the things that's really important is how do we make the law enforcement or other people feel like they're part of our community, so when they do show up, it doesn't feel like, whoa, they're here, and so I think I've been super impressed with how they've been like, can I show up at lunches at your school, or can I come and play on the playground, or can I come do these things that just normalize it, right? And at the same time, they're able to invest, just keep eyes on things, and that is helpful too. So one thing I would say too is just inviting, like you said, inviting them in, not only to walk around and check things out, but to be part of the community, because when those crisis times happen, then those relationships are established and kids can respond better, and adults can respond better to those known adults that have been around our school a lot.
Yeah, thank you for touching on that. Communal relationships are so important. Sometimes we forget as schools that we are part of a greater community. And so touching on that piece of the importance of the collaboration and the partnerships is really, really crucial. So we're just going to kick right into designated staff and who's responsible in your school for safety and emergency preparedness. What type of stakeholders do you involve? I'll kick it to you.
I think one thing in our school, we have our crisis team. In our district, it's an expectation that every building has their crisis team. And the crisis team is very similar to your school safety and emergency preparedness team. and trying to have different voices on that team from different stakeholder groups, right? I definitely want somebody from my teaching staff. We definitely want something from our student support staff. We need somebody from our health staff, obviously district staff members, making sure different voices are at the table. In addition to that, our district also have established a technology system that helps us with it called Crisis Go. That's super helpful to help us navigate different drills or different things that are happening in our building that we can communicate through our cell phones, through an app. So I almost want to say it's a combination of both, right? You have your team, right? Your crisis team that helps talk about what to do and make sure everybody is trained. And then you also have this app that supports that process. That's super, super helpful within our district.
I like that you spoke to that. Jessica, you have anything you want to add?
Sure. So we have so many teams, right? We have the crisis team, the emergency team, the behavior team, a number of teams that we have within our school district or within my school. And many of those play different roles, and sometimes the roles overlap. And the one thing I'll add to that is my leadership team, those members play a huge part of creating systems and structures that work even when it comes to safety. So getting feedback from members of my leadership team so we can understand what happens when there is an emergency. So we're all responding the same way. So we're not panicked and we're able to have calmness amongst us, but also moving swiftly so we can ensure the safety of those that are involved. Depending on my classroom leaders, because their information is vital as well, because they're with students. So making sure I take information from them as to the best way for us to move in a function that does not cause chaos, right? And so getting feedback from those members as well. And then I think it's so important that we, number one, take an opportunity to review our plans as a school unit and make sure we're able to give each other feedback about what we think works and what doesn't work. There's one other thing that I wanted to get my school staff involved around. It's who's CPR trained, who's done the de-escalation training, such as CPI. So that way, when there is a safety concern, whether it's a health concern where we need CPR, whether it's a de-escalation concern where we need to assist, but who has this type of training and who's willing to take it. And so it's so important that we not just look with the traumatic type of emergencies that may happen, but also some things that may happen just with students or just within the building. And how can we ensure that there are enough team members in the building to support those issues that may arise?
I like that you added on, as principals, we have to remember that we have to have the right players at the table. So if we don't have someone that's comfortable with doing the work that they're responsible for, it's only going to cause the situation to be, a little bit more worse or critical. So thank you for touching on that. Ashley, when you were speaking, you had started sharing about a product or an app that you use with your district. Could you talk a little bit more about physical security measures and surveillance systems that you have to help to control access to your school?
Yeah, I think we're super, super fortunate here. And I think our partnership with the Plymouth Police Department here in Wayzata has been really helpful in terms of what things do all 13 of our buildings need to ensure that physical safety before anybody enters the building. And so there are a variety of things that we have that help with that. Obviously, we have the secured entrances and we have surveillance systems around our schools. We also have systems that can tell us when people come into our office, they have to scan their ID badges and it can give us information whether or not people can go in and out of our schools. It's also a tricky slope too, though, and that's something to mention a little bit, is an elementary school is supposed to be this welcoming and inviting space, and sometimes it does feel almost over secure, but we understand that that's the things that we need to do right now to keep our kids safe and our staff safe. And we're grateful for those measures that we have in place because it does feel like we're headed in the right direction. Now, we're always open to feedback to continue to think more. Jessica mentioned, like, how do we continue to talk about it? And I wanted to go back to something she said. With my teams too, when we do drills or anything ever happen within our leadership team, we always, and crisis team, go back and be like, let's debrief right away, right? And so talk through, this happened, here's how we respond. Did that go okay? Did our tools work the way that it should? And that's also part of that process too. So I thought I'd mention that as well.
Appreciate you adding that. Jessica, do you have anything to add as far as surveillance systems and entrances?
So my school functions just as way as the way Ashley stated for his school, where we do have the secured entrance. You do have to display your identification card. But it's so important that we maintain having those security systems updated. And so when
Yes.
you think about where we are and what year we're in, making sure that those security systems are reviewed often and making sure that updates are done and identifying if there are any blind spots within your school
Mhm.
environment where you can't see something on a security system. And so those are just additional things I would add to that. And that's something that I stay in constant communication with the security team, with my district. And he'll come out and check things for me just to make sure things are functioning properly. So that way, if I need to review a camera, it's actually I'm able to do so. So just making sure that those systems are updated frequently.
You know, I think a question came to my head, and I know some of the listeners are probably wondering. We had talked when we were doing our debrief about funding, and it's almost humanly impossible to fund safety and security to this level, you know, from the building level. So it's important to have that engagement and support from your district and from your state and from the local authorities. So with that being said, you touched on a little bit already, Jessica, about communicating. So how do you best communicate and coordinate your safety plans and procedures with your students, staff, parents, and the community?
Yeah, so at the start of every year, you have to make sure your emergency plan is done and submitted. And so that is a prime opportunity for me to print this emergency plan and provide it to each staff member in my building. And during our pre-service week, we go over it from front to back. But we also review it throughout the school year because what you don't look at or what you're not reviewing, it becomes absent to the mind. So we need to discuss it. So that way we're constantly aware. If we have to be displaced from this school, where do we go? What is our location site? How will we reunify families with students? And so how do we account for who's in a building? How do we make sure the number of students that we put on our attendance roster is the number of students that are present in our faces when we get to this location? So making sure we review those things on a constant basis, again, not overdoing it, but enough so we keep it at the forefront of our mind, especially when an emergency happens. And then I'll say this, I encourage my staff members to do drills outside of my drill. So they don't know when we're doing fire drills. They are notified from the district when we're doing shelter in place because that's an email that's sent out to all staff. So there's certain drills that they're notified about from the district. But for me, I don't notify staff members of in-house drills such as the fire drills that we do. And so I encourage them to practice drills with students ahead of the official drill. So students understand what is taking place and they're not confused, alarmed, or concerned. I also post, and this is the last statement I'll make, I posted on our media platform to parents when we're having drills because I want parents to know that we have a drill scheduled for today at 2 p.m. And this is the purpose of this drill. So students understand what we're doing. I want you to understand. And also when you go home or when your scholar comes home this evening, have a discussion with them about drills and why they're so important and why we need to ensure that we're following directions so we can all be safe. So those are some of the things that I've done.
For sure. And then likewise, Jessica, I think similarly, using that time in the front to make sure people have that information is similar practice we do here at Birchview and in our district. And one thing I'm proud of, our district crisis team really helps the 13 buildings be able to navigate this together. And so it doesn't feel like my building is on an island versus another. It's like, here's what the emergency protocols are for the district. And then we all get the same information and we move forward with that. I think on my staff, I have a website just dedicated to safety, and my staff knows that's where you need to go to find out all the information you need to do as a refresher. And then I think it's also important for our families to understand what we're doing, because I think while school safety, it's very, very important, we don't want to normalize for our kids like this experience, right? And
Yes.
so it's usually after a drill, I make sure to tell families like, hey, we did this at school, in our family newsletter, and you might want to follow up with your child about this, right? And talk about what would you do at home if something like this happened? What would you do at Target if something like this happened? What would you do at the mall if something like this happened? And then also let them reaffirm for our kiddos that it's gonna be okay. You, the adults, are at school to keep you safe, and we're gonna work really hard together to keep you safe. So I think it's important, obviously, to make sure teachers know what's going on and all staff. I think even paraprofessionals and clerks and culinary staff sometimes get left out of that communication cycle.
Yeah.
And so how can we be intentional? Because we need all the adults ticking on the same page if something happens. And so I always want to make sure all the stakeholders have that information as well, and be intentional about that process.
Yes. And intentionality is key, especially when we think about the staff and the scholars that are in our building and how certain things could trigger previous experiences. So I
Mhm.
kind of want to get into what kind of trauma-informed care we should have in place if there are incidents that occur within our school.
Wow, that's so, hopefully we're not having a lot of these things
Right.
happening, right? Because I think our school's supposed to be these places that are safe and calm and all those great things that we want our kiddos to experience. However, we know that things will happen. Sometimes things will happen, and not necessarily the things that, but just a crisis moment that might, like you said, elicit some feelings from past experiences. And so I think, again, debriefing is always an important first step. In the past, here at our schools, we've had some pretty good big things where something may have happened at a house the night before, and then kids came in with that information. And so having counselors on site prepared, and ready to support kiddos and adults, right? But whatever that might have been experienced. Again, our district has a wellness team that we can sometimes triage to different buildings depending on a situation so that they can have those people ready to go right away. And kids and adults know here are the people can go and see and talk to if you want to talk more about what had happened prior to that. I don't know, Jessica, what else do you have to add to that? Because that's a big one. How can we be intentional about that too?
Yeah, that is. And that's some great points you made, Ashley. We have mental health therapists well, I have one mental health therapist and one counselor at my school. And so utilizing those supports, as you stated, but I will also add, because I'm really big on systems and structures, like, so what system do we have in place and what's the structure that supports that system? So let's talk about what took place with this event and let's see what systems and what structures we need to have in place in the event something like this occurs again.
Right.
So how did we respond?
Yep.
What things do we need to adjust to make sure that this system that we have and the structures that supports it will be something to withstand this type of trauma in the future.
Yep.
But then also, once we go through that discussion and we have those types of protocols, and I think it's very important that we utilize our local police officers or our school resource officer in this type of discussion as well, because they can give us insight that we may not have thought of as a school community. But finally, my last thought is find a way to change the environment.
Hmm.
Because when there is trauma, when things happen in a school, that kind of it's like an air over your school, a cloud, you know. So how do we shift this to get our school back to a place where we can find joy once again? And so finding time to shift that energy, once we're able to outline some official next steps that are intentional to ensure safety moving forward.
Hmm.
We'll try
Yeah.
our best to ensure safety, right? We can do our best.
Right. We want our scholars, to feel safe and happy and healthy. But like you said, we know what type of climate we're in right now. So
Hmm.
we're just trying to make sure that we are strategic in the understanding of this is not normal for
Right.
you to be doing or feeling these things. It's just become a part, it's a societal norm almost. And so our scholars don't know anything different than what some of our experiences were when we were school age. So just
Right.
keeping, like you said, keeping that joy in there, keeping happiness and supporting everyone through it is important. But also, I will say we have constables in all of our schools in Cape Penelope School District, and so our constables are not here for negative interactions with our scholars, we really want our scholars to realize they're here for safety, but they're also here to love and care for you. So I think that is important. Having them there, be a part of bus duty, car rider duty, lunch duty, recess duty, just as a norm out of always worrying about a traumatic situation happening in the school. So I'm going to go into a little bit our last question of just how do we ensure that the vulnerable students are included in our safety planning? You know, we know that they have these individuals around, but in some cases, there may be first responders that come in that they're just not prepared for, or even just a day-to-day drill.
I think that's really, really important. And just for now with the drills, and I think Jessica mentioned like with her staff, sometimes they tell them, sometimes they don't. With my students who are vulnerable, I make sure my staff give those students a heads up when we're doing drills, just because again, depending on the kid, it raises the anxiety way too much, and it's almost counterproductive to the whole process. And so we've found when we're able to give, those identified students the heads up that this is going to happen today, it's been really, really helpful. Now, in the event of an emergency, I think, and something actually happened, I think what you said earlier in terms of when our law enforcement and different first responders are becoming regulars on our campuses, then though encouraging them to visit those spaces often, because with those vulnerable students, especially when they can make connection with those adults in those moments of tense situations, they might be able to respond in a better way. So trying to layer both on the front end, giving them heads up when I can, but definitely leaning on those relationships when I can too.
It's so important, those relationships, Ashley. First, it starts with that, right? Because there has to be some level of trust amongst students to staff and vice versa, and staff to administrators. But the one thing that I wanted to add to that is just making sure when we think about those vulnerable students, assigning a staff member to that classroom or to that student so they can provide assistance. So whether the drills are known or unknown, that staff member knows if there's a drill and you are assigned to this class or this student, then that's your first response right there to ensure that that student is safe, that they're calm, and they understand what is taking place. The second thing I'll say is we are so big on social stories. So we do social stories with a lot of our vulnerable students many, many times each month, each week, so they can understand when things are taking place. So it lessens some of their concerns because you've taken them through these social stories. So now they've developed a level of understanding of these things that may take place. And then I'll end with this, just having, because I have blind spots in my building. And so having someone assigned to these areas that are not necessarily on a camera, that you can't always see, but having members of your team, and that's why it's so important to have leadership team members so you can build their capacity around the importance of this safety issue, and assigning individuals to those particular areas so they can, one, ensure that all students are safe, there's no one hiding, and making sure that they are able to respond to those concerns, ensuring that everyone is in a safe space. And just to add a little bit about those social stories, when we talk about social stories, it's done a lot with our students who are identified with special needs. However, it benefits all scholars because it's a way that you can have an issue or situation and relate it to a social event. And so many social stories, if the event is a fire drill, and then we can relate it socially to these scholars, you can actually find many social stories on YouTube or videos, or you can create your own social story and talk about the event and then relate it to this issue that we're dealing and make it a social discussion among students. So just to add some context to social stories, in the event someone was listening and they're not sure.
Social, social stories, all of us elementary teachers, this. We love social stories.
Yes, we do.
Absolutely.
Yes, we do. We can create one right now.
Right.
Just based on this conversation.
Exactly.
So, time flies when you're having fun. We could probably go on for another 2 hours.
Yeah.
But Jessica and Ashley, I want to thank you for your time. But as I was listening and we were having our conversation, I heard we need to always analyze our plans, We need to include all stakeholders.
Mhm.
We need to build relationships with the community and first responders,
Mhm.
develop our plans, communicate them consistently. But the biggest thing that I heard is we need to know our buildings. If
Mhm.
you are not aware of your building or what you are doing or where you are going, no plan is going to be effective. So once again, thank you both for being here, and thanks the audience for listening to our NAESP Principal Podcast. We'll see you next time.